So welcome to Inside the Lords. As you can imagine, behind the scenes, there's been an awful lot of discussion about the latest saga at the BBC with Huw Edwards. And although directly nothing to do with the parliamentary schedule, everybody has been agog with discussing it. The only reason I'm mentioning it, because so much has been said already, is we can see that whatever way you decide you view the personal affairs of a BBC presenter and the way it's been handled, that this is likely to turn into a row about the press, and people are already saying, whose side are you on, the BBC's or the Sun? The group Hacked Off, who are a pro-press regulation, anti-press freedom organisation, have been very keen and quick to condemn the Sun, say this proves the tabloids are irresponsible. I think that that is a very dangerous conclusion to have arrived at, because actually you expect newspapers to dig around and to hold those in power, positions of power, might be in the media or in politics, to a special kind of scrutiny. And whilst people's private peccadilloes might not be to my taste, I think the hypocrisy is a perfectly reasonable thing to go for somebody on. However, whilst I don't want to have the news dominated by what a particular presenter has done or not done in their private lives, I think that it is important that we don't allow this issue now to escalate into an attack on our ability to find out and know as much as possible via the media. And I raise this because actually in the online safety bill this week, there was almost an attempt at hijacking that particular legislation by those in the Lords who support Hacked Off, who wanted to suggest that there should be no exemption from regulation in the online safety bill because they want the press to be regulated, and used it to launch a scathing attack on Rupert Murdoch and the terrible things that happen in newspapers. And immediately red flag rather even, and a bit of a red rag for me, you could see the dangers of people who say we cannot let the press report without fear or favour. They need to be controlled and reined in. And a lot of this, by the way, is an attack on the plebs. If you see the people who are supporting Huw Edwards, I don't mean him as an individual, but almost on the side of saying he has been much pestered and bullied and so on, they are all people in the media elite. And I think you do have to ask just a question to yourself. If this was a presenter from, for example, Talk TV or GB News, would the same people be rallying round and saying that they should not be investigated? I doubt it very much. So I think that there is a partisan approach to this that we have to be wary of. And I am one of the people who actually wishes the story had never broken, because I'm really not wanting to be distracted by it. On to directly Inside the Lords. I'm very tired because we were up very, very late last night in the Lords voting on amendments that are part of ping pong for the illegal migration bill. And ping pong is where the Lords had amended the bill, it got sent over to the House of Commons, the Commons rejected most of the Lords' amendments, the government actually made some concessions, particularly around the timetable of when the bill would start. They can't be retrospective now. They made concessions on pregnant women and time of that they would be detained, and also on unaccompanied children. But nonetheless, the Lords refused to accept those concessions directly and put forward yet another, 15 amendments. Now, it's appropriate, it's all right for the Lords to do that. In a way, that's the process, that's the job that you expect. But I'm afraid that I am very cynical about the opposition to this bill, because they are wrecking amendments. They're not scrutinising, with the odd exception, and there were just some amendments that were just sensible to improve the bill. Most of them were effectively to say that this bill should not happen. I don't care whether you like the Rwanda scheme or not, I'm not particularly keen on it. There is obviously a democratic obligation to take control of the borders. There's a huge amount of public support for dealing with the small boats question. The bill is about illegal migration, and the insistence on those in the House of Lords to consistently and only discuss that in terms of refugees fleeing war, persecution, talking about everybody as though they have actually asylum status already, the way that the debate is conducted by assuming that a moral high ground position in a way that sneers at anyone who might, for example, be disturbed about the fact that the government is spending far more on housing the people from the boats than in hotels than they are on homelessness, or there's a big issue in Llanelli, near where I'm from in Wales, where a hotel has been taken over at great expense by the government, whereas people of Llanelli are literally on their knees in terms of cost of living crisis, resentment about the fact that they can't get a GP appointment but there will be NHS facilities available in the hotel. Look, you've got to be able to understand why this is such a fraught issue, but the only empathy that we're asked to deploy by members of the House of Lords is with those people in the boats. Anyone who refuses to just go along with wrecking this bill is treated as though they're a xenophobic, racist pariah. I object to that. So I voted with the government largely. I abstained on some amendments and I voted on 2 opposition amendments. It will return to the Lords next week for what should be the final discussion, in which the Lords in convention have to give way to the elected House, because you have to remember the Lords is unelected. There are people in the Lords who are saying they won't give way, that they want to force this bill off the statute books, and by not allowing it to go through before recess, which is in a week and a half, they could well scupper the bill completely, or they simply want to just gut it of any meaning so it won't be able to do the very thing that it's set up to do. So that's on that. I actually spent most of the week though on the online safety bill, and the speeches that I've made this week are below. And I say below because I hope that you're watching this Inside the Lords on Substack, and if you aren't watching it on Substack, then you should really sign up to our Substack in order to keep in touch with the Academy of Ideas work in general. It's free if you want to give us money, all to the good. But anyway, the Substack is important because we also cover the events of Ideas Matter charity, like Living Freedom, like Debating Matters, and we have guest contributors. So all my speeches on online safety are below if you're on Substack, and if you're not, sign up. The online safety bill has got to that point where it's about to be passed. I mean, there is no opposition, and one of the points that I made during a very important group of amendments this week, and this is the way it goes: free speech, free expression was just grouped as a group of amendments like it was one of a million other things to do. Whereas actually the whole bill is a real speech limiting piece of legislation, but it's kind of cast to one side as just a bit of a special interest. During that debate, I started off by pointing out that I'd assumed that with such a huge piece of legislative change that was a real challenge to democratic norms in this country about what is permissible speech, with actually a real affront to things like Article 10 and Article 8 of the European Human Rights Convention, that we would be in a situation where the House of Lords would be packed with everybody in there, all the law lords, every opposition party, everyone discussing it, and basically the benches have been empty. And so I really raised a huge fuss, and I drew the analogy with the online between the online safety bill and the illegal migration bill, which is packed all the time, everybody treating it as though that's the most important piece of legislation. Whereas the online safety bill is going to fundamentally change the constitutional arrangement between the state and its citizens via proxy organisations like Big Tech and via a regulator, Ofcom, that will limit what we can see, what we can say, what we can read, and what we can post online. And I made a fuss about why being a free speecher should not be treated as some eccentricity, because I kind of raise these issues, myself and Lord Moylan, Daniel Moylan. We're the only two who raise any objections on free speech, and they kind of pat us on the head and say, the free speechers are in, as though we're the peculiar ones. And I would like to just say that although it wasn't the most brilliant speech in the world, I think something slightly shifted. There was some embarrassment. We did actually force them to reflect that they had got so caught up in the weeds of what they're going to do to keep us safe versus keep us free, that they forgot that free speech was a fundamental, foundational value of a democratic society. And at the very least, I think that's slightly shifted the ground. It won't stop the bill, but it at least makes them embarrassed when they introduce censorious clauses and so on. This bill will, get royal assent with no opposition. There won't be any ping pong like with the illegal migration bill, because all of the amendments, and the government has put forward about 300 new amendments at report stage, which is extraordinary because you haven't got any time to scrutinise right at the end. And I was complaining to the Lib Dems and the Labour Party about all of this, which usually they will be up in arms about and say it's absolutely unconstitutional. And they laughed and said, yes, but most of those amendments are written by us anyway. In other words, the government has completely rolled over and conceded to everything the opposition wanted. All of them about making it more prescriptive, more regulatory, less free, and have not made any concessions whatsoever to those of us who've argued for free speech amendments. So that will show you the lay of the land. So that's going to get royal assent. No one will object. It'll become the law. It'll take a bit of time. And you might get despondent, as I have this week, and think it's all over. But actually, this law has to be implemented. And it's worth noting that if the public, even at this late stage, start making a clamour and start saying that part of the Online Safety Act, as it will be, is absolutely illiberal, Ofcom shouldn't do this, this is atrocious, and so on and so forth, it's just possible that they might back down on stuff, because so many of the finer details are going to be left to guidance and Ofcom, and so consequently you can have a say, you should have a say. And I'll just finish with this. In Ireland, they've got an online hate speech bill that's going through. It's actually got stuck in Senate, which is the equivalent of the Lords, their second chamber. And there's been a public outcry, and now it looks as though the bill might actually be scuppered. They've actually postponed it till after recess. So you at least can see that with public outcry, you can do something. So I'll do what I can in the Lords. Next week we're going to be dealing with encryption, because they're trying to attack private messaging. Absolutely atrocious and dangerous if they do, and WhatsApp will disappear if that's the case from the UK. But despite what I do in the Lords, it's up to you, the community of free speechers that are watching, listening and signed up to our Substack, to actually start getting your views heard properly, now that it's clear that this bill is not about protecting children. That's a tiny part of it. It's about attacking adults' freedoms.